maintenance team meeting for July 28th. And I guess I should now say working group, since the working group's been chartered. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, that was me. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share? Okay, if not, we will move on to the regular agenda, which was tagged based on issues tagged in the repo. The first one is number 386, suggest ignoring a vulnerability by the package maintainer. I'm just opening it up. This was opened by Nodder. And I guess it was suggesting, it was asking for feedback on the concept of, providing some way for maintainers to be able to identify that a vulnerability doesn't apply to their package, because we've seen some recentish cases where vulnerabilities went out, caused a fair amount of work for maintainers, and in many cases they really didn't even apply to the package because they weren't using the vulnerable bits. And I think this is coming out of some of that discussion that, like, hey, it would be great if there was a way to say, hey, I've looked at this, I don't think I'm vulnerable.
Well, and it's been a problem for years, right? Almost every prototype pollution CVE and almost every catastrophic regex backtracking CVE, yeah, like it applies to less than 1% of the people that get security alerts for them.
Right.
So I've been talking with Lira and Tal at SNCC about it for a long time now. And while SNCC seems to be committed to coming up with some mechanism to mitigate this in their own platform, that only helps SNCC users unless they publish that data in a way that NPM and GitHub are both able to and willing to access and use. But when I've had this discussion with NPM ever since NPM audit has existed, I've brought it up to them every time this happens. The pushback has essentially been like, yeah, that sucks, but like we need people to be able to trust the warnings, and that means and essentially like everyone agrees we want people to be able to trust the warnings, but some folks like myself think that false negatives erode that trust, and other folks are more concerned with like false positives eroding that trust. In other words, some of the folks at NPM seem to be more concerned with letting real vulnerabilities go unreported.
Right.
Whereas I am more concerned with undermining the entire attention people pay to security advisories by pretending that non-vulnerabilities are vulnerabilities. And those two positions, while both valid in various ways and are sort of in conflict.
Right.
And this whole initiative from this issue is one of those sides.
Yeah, you cry wolf too many times. Does that mean people just ignore you? And versus do we let something slip in?
Right. Do we let a wolf kill one baby because that way we'll pay attention to all the other wolves, as opposed to do we cry wolf every time so nobody ever looks out for wolves again? And neither of those is particularly good.
No, exactly. And I guess, I saw some of the discussion in there was around, well, what if you don't trust the package maintainer to, but it does sound, I think the point was made that the package maintainers, if they're, untrustworthy, have a much more direct way to cause problems.
But there's two kinds of untrustworthiness here, right? One is malice, in which, yes, if you depend on a malicious maintainer, you're screwed, right? Like, it's done. But the other one is a more tactful term than incompetence.
Lazy.
Sure. Or
I don't know if that's nicer, but
insert term here that is not condescending or anything like that. But just a maintainer that ends up being less rigorous for whatever reason, right? And that is, I think, where this concern is coming from, is essentially that somebody will look at their library and the CVE and be like, well, that doesn't apply. And then no one sees it again. And then in fact, it does apply. And any system that empowers a security aware maintainer is going to be one that also allows a non-security aware maintainer to, with the best of intentions, inadvertently make a mistake. And nobody has yet proposed at least a design for like the NPM audit output or the like GitHub security alerts that would solve both of those problems at once. And from my perspective as a security aware maintainer, I hope, I don't want my consumers to ever see a security alert for my packages, period. Like, in other words, I want first to be given the chance to fix it before they ever see it.
Sure.
And then I only want them to see an alert if the vulnerability actually affects them. And like, I don't, this obviously requires that I be responsive, right? Like it's fine if they see an alert if I'm out of town and not paying attention, but like, but not every maintainer is necessarily going to be that on top of it or that concerned about it. I mean, the Lodash maintainer correctly believes that there was a CVE that like just hadn't for Lodash that was I think the most recent thing, and like the Lodash maintainer just didn't see it as a problem because it wasn't a real problem. The actual problem was caused by the alert, not by the CVE. But and so his response, for better or worse, was to ignore it. After a few months, there was somebody who had maintainer access who published an update, not because the problem actually necessarily needed fixing, but because everyone's builds needed to stop spewing audit warnings, right?
Right. Yeah.
But like, had that not been available, Lodash would just always be spewing warnings for everyone. And so either people stop using Lodash entirely, one of the most used packages on the entire planet, or they are going to disable audit warnings for everything. So like, that is literally a like life or death moment for the security industry in JavaScript, and yet someone still chose to file the CVE on Lodash. And like,
right,
I don't know, it's a really hard problem, and I just don't know how it can be solved unless we get enthusiastic stakeholders in NPM, GitHub, and SNCC, et cetera,
right,
to all be involved with coming up with something.
Right, agreed. Enthusiastic. I'm just taking a quick note on that. Stakeholders. Stakeholders to help solve the difficult. So I definitely agree. In terms of concrete steps for this team, do we think we need to do anything beyond continue the discussion in the issue itself? And the other thing I was thinking about myself is like, is this the place where we should have this discussion? Is it that should we as a package maintenance team try and pull together these stakeholders and try and make them enthusiastic?
If we can, this seems like as good a place as any.
The other thought, the collaboration spaces proposal that I have at the OpenJS Foundation is maybe another place where the group could come together. Now, that's only if it needs like sort of its own space versus just fitting in like, issues or discussion underneath the package maintenance team. So I don't know how big you think like the overall discussion and work and everything needs to be.
I mean, it could, given that NPM and GitHub are the primary tools in the space for this, it really might take as few as one person from each of those companies who wants to make it happen. Like, it doesn't even have to be both of them. If one of these two players fixes it, every other player is going to, because that is how that is how the market works.
Right.
But like, we have to get one of them willing to do it. And I don't know who else I can talk to that I haven't already talked to at NPM and or GitHub that could make it happen.
Have you talked to Miles? Because he's new.
Actually, no, that's true.
At
because
NPM.
He is new at
And NPM/GitHub, whichever.
Yeah. I think he's more on the GitHub side, but either way, yeah. So Miles might be a good person to ask for sure. And you're right. The last time I had these conversations was before Miles worked there, so that's worth it. If anyone else has contacts, that's worth exploring.
I mean, and you said that Loran has already, shown interest. I think that they'd already mentioned a feature that they were looking on to sort of help automatically say, hey, this doesn't even apply to your
Yeah,
And
and
so I
that's
could see
yeah,
that
and
going
I've
back
been
to your
talking to them
trusted
about that
problem,
for a
right?
long time.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I've mentioned to Laurent as well that if SNCC makes it available such that GitHub and npm can use it, they may do that, right? And
Right.
if SNCC is actually willing to do the work to collect this data and share it, then like that positions them better in the ecosystem anyway. So that's part of my
Right.
sales pitch to Laurent. And I'm sure many other folks have been talking about it inside SNCC, but like thankfully they're starting to do it and have asked me for feedback along the way.
Because it could even be that, like, if you had a tool like that that says it doesn't apply to you, that addresses the, not people, maintainers who aren't as security aware, conscious, whatever, making a choice. If they can say, well, this tool tells, like, even if it's that they need to flag it themselves, but they could say, I'm flagging this because this tool has told me it doesn't apply. That
Yep.
adds to the sort of safety, credibility.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, does it seem worthwhile for like us as a team to try and, pull together, Miles, Loran, and some of us to have a discussion on this front? Do you think that's useful? Just
Yeah,
thinking
I mean,
kind
I
of like,
think
how do we progress this? If it seems interesting and seems like something that, would add value for sure.
I had a question. I'm fairly naive to a lot of this, but I was just wondering if, kind of to Jordan's point, is there also like again, naive. I assume maybe there's like a degree of education that needs to happen, because if the CVE was, I guess, better at explaining, like, if you're in this situation, if you're like 1 degree, 2 degree, 5 degrees from this Lodash dependency, like that increases or decreases your, I guess, responsiveness to it? Is it something in the CVE process? Do we need like a education
so the
component?
CVE text itself is usually pretty good about explaining this stuff, like about like in these subset of cases using this package is a problem, right? The issue is that there's nothing in the CVE system to, for example, discern which of the 48 APIs this package provides are actually insecure. Nor is there something in the JavaScript ecosystem to say which of the APIs this package provides are you using, right? So like, there's just no way to, this is one of the great things about small modules and the problems of big ones, is that that's the only boundary we have to cleanly indicate if something affects you or not. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is the security industry, in the same way as like programmers used to be incentivized to produce more lines of code, and we've all learned why that's a bad idea. The security industry is incentivized to produce CVEs that have the broadest impact possible. And so, there's that phrase, is that it's impossible to convince a man of something when his living depends on him not believing it, something to that effect. And like I'm misquoting it, I'm sure, but something like that. So like, out of no malice alone, but like, I think it's really difficult to convince folks in the security industry that overly broad CVEs are worse than missing a vulnerable like call site. And that's the philosophical discussion I hinted at in the beginning. And like, yeah, it's just what I know for sure is like, for example, I maintain a bunch of popular ESLint plugins, and the catastrophic regular expression ones, the attack vector is you put a regular expression in your own configuration that makes your linter hang or crash. That's not an attack vector, right? Like, all you're going to do is when you put that in, your CI is not going to pass, right? Like, who cares? But there is no way for me to block that CVE from applying to the ESLint plugins, right? And so what that means is that I have to make some sort of update or just leave the thing alone. And like, so the CVE is valid in the sense that there is a vulnerability here, right? Like, user data can cause bad things to happen. But like, the real issue is that that's okay, right? Like, something where you have to attack yourself is not a vulnerability conceptually, but the security industry treats it as one. The one with Minimist, where you could craft some command line arguments that broke your own invocation of a command line command, is like not a real problem. it's just a theoretical one. And so given that it requires a sort of ideological coherence, I don't know what a solution would be.
One
But
thing
like,
that I
yeah,
thought of just
thank you,
as you
Alan.
were talking about that was, part of the problem may be that it's only showing one side of the information. So like one approach to this is like you tag it and just say, this is not applicable to my module, right? But maybe something in between where you can tack on, like the maintainer can tack on and say, you know, I've reviewed the CVE and it does not apply to my module for blah, 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 blah. And, you know, consumers could choose whether they wanted to automatically act on maintainers saying that, you know, hey, I don't think it is in their explanation, or simply show that there was a vulnerability as well as the explanation from the maintainers that says, oh, but I don't think this applies. So today you just get, here are all my vulnerabilities. And that's all you've got, right? And I think in organizations, they're like, you know, the only thing I can ask for is for that to not be there because I don't have any more information. Where maybe if it was like, here's the vulnerabilities, here's the responses from the maintainers that say why this isn't actually applicable, would provide more information to the end user. And, you know, that the people who then demand that they be fixed to say, oh, okay, well, we're comfortable that it's fine.
So the challenge there is that neither GitHub nor NPM provides any way of overriding a single vulnerability report. There's an RFC for NPM to start allowing this, but like even at the top level, there's no way for me to say, I know that this CVE doesn't apply to me. Right. And like, that's even separate from the like package maintainer level. And so there isn't, that mechanism would have to exist for that maintainer explanation to help.
Right.
But then the other thing is, I suspect if that exists, if everyone's like, well, you can trust the maintainers you already trust or not, I think people, you know, and do more work. I think people are just going to go with the autofix approach.
Right. And that's, but maybe it's, you know, like by, maybe we'll get more like we can address the concerns of the people, like, because it's one thing to say most people will do this, but it's another thing to say that's their only option. For the people who think it's still a concern, if we provide an option that says, and if you're particularly like you don't trust the maintainers, you still have this other option which is helpful to you, but you make the ultimate decision, right? So
that's true.
But it sounds like it's definitely an interesting area to discuss. Did it so? And it sounds like you've been trying to do that.
Yeah. So I don't want to discourage anyone from continuing to try to do stuff. I just like personally feel like I've largely exhausted my options, and all I can do is keep bugging people whenever this comes up. But other people are like, I hope can help, because I want this fixed.
I just wonder now, like, if trying to set up something with Miles, Loran, and, you know, some of the people from this group would be a useful thing to try.
I think so when you volunteer for this committee, you're really volunteering to, as I just said before, to grapple with the harder, esoteric, moral dilemmas. And if somebody doesn't put their hand up and say, well, yeah, I'm going to address it, it won't get addressed, and it will become a problem. And it is already a problem. We know this. That
right.
I'm not going to speak for everybody, but I imagine a lot of people have similar attitudes to security alerts because of the sheer number of them. They've lessened their sort of sterling value, and that needs to be remedied. Like, if somebody says, you know, the sky is falling, it should mean something, especially if it's coming from really the registry and from GitHub. And that's probably where we're going to, as you said, going to have to approach it from. Even we should be prepared to have the conversation, even if we feel it is a long shot.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
May I? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I agree with a lot of what was discussed here. In terms of what this group can do is, I don't think there's any best practices or recommendations. I mean, as Jordan rightly points out, there is no obvious way to, as a consumer of the package, to mark certain audit failures as something you're bound to ignore, or even silence them for a duration, which something like SNCC policy file, it allows you to silence a certain vulnerability for a duration of time, right? And then it starts alerting again if it hasn't been fixed. which allows you to sort of at least continue with the builds. But aside from that, dealing with that in a way of deferrals, in a way of ignoring things, are there any other best practices that are defined as a consumer that you can do so that we can at least teach people how you deal with that as a consumer when you see these alerts and when you know that these are either not going to get fixed or are going to get fixed after a while, or there's debates, and at least then you can guide people to, you know, address that on their side, which is also something that, you know, we have to sort of accept the fact that vulnerabilities are there. And as somebody who has to look into SNCC failures quite often in the day job, if you start off with a base Ubuntu container, which is Ubuntu and an LTS Ubuntu version, you could have, even in the base container, you would have at least 100 vulnerabilities before you actually start installing anything, right? Your report would be 100 vulnerabilities. And I pointed that out to some folks in SNCC as well, that, you know, it's kind of hard to even begin to assess the impact of that. Right? But this is a starting point for the OS, and yet we are in a situation where, as a JavaScript ecosystem, which is huge, we are saying that, you know, oh, one package has one vulnerability, which is a non-vulnerability, and then all of a sudden, all of the CIs go red, and there's, you know, something to be said that maybe we're doing something wrong in there as well, and maybe there's you know, even calls for discussion from the wider community, because, you know, there's a random guy coming in and saying, oh, I have a red build, please fix, and they never, you know, come back. But some of those people, they would probably have an opinion. So yeah, like I said, in terms of suggestions of what we can do is get a wider community of non-maintainers involved, and maybe start collecting and writing up some of the practices.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Certainly, I like the Ubuntu case that you mentioned. I think that causes similar heartburn to some organizations, right? Like, I know certainly, like, you know, the more I work with the people at Red Hat, the more, you know, there's a pretty strong focus on their containers not having and reporting issues, and internally, you know, I think like that's sort of like having a good way where it's just not like you don't even see the vulnerability will help a lot of teams, because actually trying to go to the security organizations and saying, oh, this one really isn't an issue, doesn't seem to work very well.
No.
Right? You need some more official backing. Like, I think if there was a way that said, well, look, but the maintainer said this didn't apply, you might make some progress. Where if you're just saying, we just don't want to fix it, they're like, no, fix it anyway, right? And,
well, is that where I mean, again, naive observer here, but because I heard Jordan make that point as well, is there some sort of middle ground where the tooling could help, where like the CVE is broad, but your package JSON is very specific, and somewhere you could find the intersectionality of the APIs that are statically analyzable from your code, and basically like that could thread the needle, be like, oh wow, I analyzed your code, and yeah, you hit 7 of these 10, you know, flagged APIs. So that, and then there's an algorithm that helps calculate, and then you, with that score, if that's like a community effort, then you could say like, well, the reason why I think this is an issue is because when you dig into the code, I'm not vulnerable based on, you know, the use cases presented, the APIs, you know, I'm using the other API, not the other, you know, so it could go both ways. So anyway, just.
I think that's tooling to help make the assertion, but it's got to still come back to, is there a way and is it accepted that maintainers will make the assertion that it doesn't apply?
Like if it's built,
well, and it's all, I mean, there's whole businesses built on the algorithms you're describing, Owen, right? Like that is SNCC's business model, is that they're doing more in-depth analysis of the code, and, you know, so like it's great, but I would imagine a SNCC representative would say, that's why you should pay for our product. Right.
Right, but it doesn't help. Like you couldn't, like, as a customer, you couldn't say, you know, say you're a commercial organization, be a SNCC customer. It tells you that you're not vulnerable, which is great. But then there's no way for you to pass that on to the consumers of your module. Right, like, which is what we're talking about now. You'd like to say we've invested the effort or the money by, you know, paying somebody to run their analysis, and we know we're not vulnerable, so we want that not to show up and you know, everybody to have to upgrade if it's not necessary, or us to have to upgrade our components and spend money and time that, you know, the tool has told us we don't need to, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But you still have to, because your downstream consumers are in the same position.
It was like a GitHub action that like threaded the needle through all these or something like that. You know, I mean, it certainly seems that GitHub is, you know, kind of in the middle of both of it. So, so yeah, I don't know if it's just, I mean, yeah, it's probably not something this team can, well, it's probably something this team can push forward, but it probably requires a combination of the right people and like some sort of prototype concept of, you know, because I get, yeah, I mean, I get SNCC has its market position, but since GitHub's doing all the hosting, NPM's doing all the publishing, you know, they're more or less, you know, facilitating the means of production at both ends. So, you know, they
Right.
Maybe a good way forward is to invite,
they're just
you know,
thinking,
Miles and Loran to our next meeting to talk about this issue, just to see if we can get interest in, you know, collaboration on moving forward, as opposed to a separate meeting or anything like that. How's that sound?
You're right. I mean, it's also worth noting that NPM 7 is both likely to at some point add the API we talked about like as a top level app owner being able to indicate which reports you don't care about. But also, I believe that their NPM audit output is going to change so that if you have a transitive dependency that has a CVE, but like something farther up the chain could be updated and it would fix it. Like I think it's trying to do something like that, where instead of telling you, oh, you have Lodash somewhere that's bad, it's going to tell you, like, if you update this package that's as close as possible to the top of your tree, then you get new stuff, or, you know, or things like that. So I have a feeling that it's going to be improved, but I think it would still be highly helpful to have a meeting like you're talking about with Miles and Laurent, and ideally someone from NPM as well, to try and figure out a way that maintainers can specifically say, for my package, this CVE doesn't apply.
Right.
You know.
GitHub.
And also, I don't know if NPM offers any early warning to maintainers the way that the CVE system often does.
Right.
Like, so it would be really great to be able to say, like, even if the CVE is not on my package, if it's on any of my dependencies, please give me a heads up, like at least an hour before the public sees it, you know, because then I have the opportunity to fix it before then.
So if we invited like Miles, Darcy, who often comes to these meetings from NPM, Loran, anybody else that you mentioned, Ron, maybe? Who's Ron?
Oh no, I said, sorry, I was pronouncing Loran differently.
Oh, Loran. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Loran. Oh, I got it. Okay. So, okay, maybe to our next meeting to discuss. Meeting for okay, so this is what I was going to put in. Discuss the package maintenance team meeting. We thought it would be good to invite people for NPM GitHub's SNCC to our next meeting. Yes. Maybe Miles, Darcy, Loran for a discussion to see if there's any opportunity to work together on the issue. Does that make sense?
Sounds good to me.
Yes, no, sounds good. Okay, I will paste that and we'll plan to see if we can get them to come to the next meeting and talk. So we've actually used quite a bit of good time. That was a good discussion though. So I'd suggest we move on to the next issue unless anybody has more they want to add to that one. No? Okay, so the next one is defining documenting a process for request for help, RFH. This is 372. And I see that actually it's closed. So we still need to discuss that one?
Probably not, other than, yeah, it landed and yeah, it's there. I went back to a couple of the other issues linked to that where teams were asking for help and just kind of pointed them in that direction. So anyway, for anybody here, there's now kind of like a entry point if any maintainer is looking for like a one-stop shop for what we have as a group to offer, and hopefully that'll expand over time. But yeah, I'll remove the label now.
Okay, that sounds good. The next one is like, you don't have to remove, now that it's closed, it should just not show up on the issue. I think it must have been that it was closed after the issue was generated, that's all.
Gotcha.
The next one is PKGS org for workgroup supported tooling. This is 271. You know, it's all been approved. We've been chartered. It's just sort of moving along with sort of moving in the direction of establishing the org as we suggested, making sure it's ready to move over to the node organization. Current thing that I have open is the PR to propose the initial set of administrative members. We don't really have a way to, you know, under the previous governance to select the initial set, but I just selected it based on, you know, what came in the new governments in terms of who I thought met the requirements and kind of had it a need/desire to help manage the PKGS organization. I guess like I don't see any objections to the list as it currently is now. So probably if we just let it go for, I think it's 14 days from the last approval or 4 approvals.
Yep,
Okay.
Good idea of time, 14 days.
We can always change it too if we think it's stretching out, but that, yeah, we'll leave that for now. And then, you know, we'll basically do that. And then I think the next sort of thing we need to just audit the PKGS orgs to make sure we think they have all the licenses and everything that we've said they would. And then we can probably plan the move of the org over to the node.js move the org over to the node.js project. Anything else people want to add to that one?
Just a quick question. Was it 14 days or 4 approvals or 14 days
And
yeah, I think it was like 14 days from the 4th approval.
yep. We were very conservative at the beginning.
Yeah, that's a typical, like, people coming together. It's like, let's give people lots of time. And so
I think it had to do with the meeting cadence as well.
Yes. Yeah.
True. Making sure people are aware. I mean, it's not really a big deal. I don't think there's any massive panic for us to get this stuff done. So it's not a big deal. Proposed initial set of admin. Okay. So then the next one in the agenda is next steps on support levels in package.json. That one, we've landed a number of updates. I have a PR open which has the documentation updates. And you know, the thing I want to mention here is I think after we've landed those documentation updates, which I'm hoping will be in the next few days, we should be at the point where we're ready to promote and ask maintainers to add the support information based on our earlier discussions. So if there's other things that we think we need to do, it would be good to sort of identify those. Otherwise, I think we might, the next, after that lands, the next step might be to write up a blog that this team would publish with that ask and go from there. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. And if anybody has a chance to read the doc, that'd be great. Thanks to Jordan for taking a look and pointing out the thing about MPX. That was good. I added that in, found a bug that in the dependencies, like since I've installed it to test, it didn't fail. But when I tried MPX, one of the dependencies was in the wrong place. So. Cool. Okay, so let's move on. The next one is suggested modules from PKGS that could benefit from CI/CD implementation via GitHub Actions for hard case examples. This is number 340.
So that was mine. So the feedback from the testing document is, Glenn, you need actually hard cases. And I said, yeah, those will exist in the integration CI/CD document. But I think what we need to do is actually, I've got cases I'm working on as a part of the Express Triage team for basically, GitHub Actionify, create Docker files, run them, integration test them with all the different, Postgres, Redis, Mongo, just do basic stuff. But I think if we choose our own modules and say, this is an example of how to do it. So if you give me one in PKGS that we want to do, I will go do it using GitHub Actions. I will run all whatever's being done on it. I will turn it into a Docker file. I'll publish it to my own one. I'll provide lots of examples and we can work on them. And we will run integration tests on it and say, this is an example of how to do this case. And I'm after which ones we want to do. So that we want to refer to them. We want to refer to hard examples in the CI/CD document and say, this is a case of how to do it. So right. Dominic, because you've got to speak up now because this was your ask and I think it was a good ask. Don't just say, go do it on GitHub Actions or Circle CI. This is a case of how to do it. This is an example. This is using the free tooling. This does everything you need to do. You may copy this and this might be a good use case.
Yeah, so I think we have several repos there, and I think you can just go and do either one of those. What I haven't done is, so I will be starting work on detect node support, reading from GitHub Actions as well. So we may as well add one on detect node support because that's what I use for my test. Ugh, there's so many bugs. I'm sorry, real bugs. I'm outdoors. So yeah, detect node support could use a GitHub Actions example, but what I'm also thinking is that maybe we should just start preparing for the next step as well and see how we can build out CI config GitHub Actions, because that's something I haven't really thought about deeply or done enough research. So we do have the CI config Travis, which is yeah, we have the initial scaffold. There's some discussions there, but we need the same thing for CI config GitHub Actions. So yes, something that people can import that would automatically upgrade their versions, as opposed to just taking the basic one from GitHub, whatever it's called. I don't remember off the top of my head, right? So if we could start building that out, and then that could be a good example of how you set up a CI on your repo, on your package that you're working on. But I also have to get back to one of my pet peeves there, is that we also have some wording there which says CI/CD pipeline, and I specifically have a problem with the word pipeline because it could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So if we're going to define what a CI/CD pipeline is, maybe we should see what it means to us and what it means in the context of a node package.
Yeah, I agree. I'm less worried about the words, but more worried about there being real hard examples that people can go to, meaning like this is how you do it, or this is
Right.
a way of doing it.
I don't
must
think
say-
it's a hard case, but like, you know, the support repo already has GitHub Actions that run testing. So I don't know if, you know, you're looking for a concrete case where we're doing it. That's one. It may not have the hardness aspect to it, but it's maybe a starting point.
Okay, I'll look at the support, because that was what Dominic was saying. When I looked around, I must say I didn't see. Let me go back and look at support. Look at the pipeline.
Yeah, so I think Wes set that up. It currently does, you know, it runs a
Okay.
GitHub action that tests on 10, 12, and 14.
So what I'm referring to is a little bit more than that. That's the kind of the
Right.
thing you do with Travis. What I'm really talking about is you do this, you run your integration tests, but then you see if you want to publish to npm, you want to build a Docker image with your module, and then you actually run your module in a Docker image to a full integration test. Does it work? Rather than just running a full, I dare not now use the word beginning with P, as Dominicus doesn't like that. That's what I regard as the full pipeline. Like,
Well, does
this is
anyone
just-
do that? Because like your tests are usually written with that assume that your dependencies and dev dependencies are present, and that they import from somewhere. How do you do that without writing tests specially for that case?
You'd have to actually, when you build an image to actually run it, you'd have to actually run then if it was, say, like you're talking about a CLI tool, you'd actually have to run the CLI, but actually do proper integration tests rather than just unit tests.
But like, I mean, it's fine if it's fine to have instructions how to do that for folks that want to do that. But I guess I'm not aware that that's a thing that happens in the ecosystem.
I don't think that many people do it.
Right.
Whether we want to strongly recommend it, I don't think that a lot of people should do it. But I can take back the example of detect node support. I don't have an automated thing, but I do have a very small short script which just executes the thing, and just what I check before I publish is that at least it doesn't crash when it does these very basic things, right? So I don't think it's a bad thing to recommend, and if we can make it easy, then it's nice. It's never easy. Like the higher you go up the test pyramid, it gets harder. But yeah, if we want to ride that up, yeah.
But I guess like I'm familiar with, you know, if you're building an application using the various tools, those people, and deploying that application, there's often a CI/CD pipeline, you know, using Tecton or something else that says, okay, I'm going to take all my components. Not only am I going to test them, I'm going to publish, package it up into the way I'm going to deploy it to production. It may actually go to production if you've enabled that cycle, or it may go to a test phase first, and then.
I think we're talking about a few different things. Like if you're generally, I think of the things as there's apps and there's packages. Apps are deployed, packages are published. And regardless of the fact that when you have an app, you may package it up into an artifact and quote, publish that to production. Like realistically, that's not what I think this group is focusing on. That's like, certainly you may have a pipeline there, you may have integration tests, right? But for a published package that other things consume or invoke, right? I think that the scope of our group should be like, first of all, documenting things that are already done.
Okay.
Right? Like, what does the ecosystem do? Here's how you do that. And here is why we suggest this approach, right? Also, if there's any new thing we can add, like the support stuff, which is largely like little to no configuration, which is sort of like, here's a tool that no one's running really, but if you run this, you get these extra benefits. Go nuts, right? Like that's something we could recommend. I think that it's a tall order for our group to recommend that people write a whole new brand of tests to to do integration. Like, not that it's a bad idea or that people shouldn't do it. They probably should, and it's probably a great idea, but like, I think it's a really tough thing. Like we're still trying to get everyone on like
to do
run
right.
CI on the right node
Yes.
versions
No,
and lint your
I-
project with
I
something.
see to that point. We're still
know.
getting them to run unit tests and
Right.
Right.
run
So
version
like I don't want to like pop the bubble on that idea. It just feels like
too soon.
like a very far away dream of something
Okay.
that we could really recommend in good conscience.
Okay.
That's kind of where I was going, in that I think it is something that there are groups of people who do that. And, and I'm sure within the company you work at, Glenn, and the one I work at, but I'm not sure it's what package maintainers are close to doing yet.
Okay.
And so along the same lines of, we can focus on some other things that are more, like it may be ways out, which is what you're saying.
I agree, and I probably think you're right for this group, but I do believe that will be the way. So GitHub Actions offer this. It's free. And a lot of the things that you already see that you have in Travis for LTS and so forth, they don't exist yet in GitHub Actions. There's a rather limited, you might see at the most 400 stars or 50 stars. There's, a recommendation for a GitHub action. It's not widely used yet. It's widely talked about, but I don't think it's as widely used as, say, Travis or internal ones. So no, I see you're probably right. This is probably too soon for that, but okay, we'll continue on. Let's leave that one. I think
it's
you're
still
right.
I think if it's interesting to try and help how you do configure your repo with GitHub to do your unit testing, that's still potentially interesting. And Travis, and like we have the configs, which you can pull in, which is one step, but I don't know how obvious. Like I haven't configured GitHub enough myself through Actions. So is it just like obvious and every maintainer's like, yeah, okay, I just go think and I'm done? Or pointing to examples for that might still be useful.
I think the obvious thing is as probably at this stage is to make sure that they have a matrix set up and they run integration tests. Same things that we're doing with Travis, but it does hold the possibility. I'm doing it now with some of the Express things to, you can really build your image and run your image. I mean, it's obviously Docker, so it's all Linux, so there are some limitations, but you can actually run the code and run integration tests on it. So it's more like the SitGym type thing,
Right?
But obviously, it's has limitations because you're not in control of the environment. But it does offer that. But we should move on because I want to talk about
I'd say like it would be.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing it for Express, once you have something you can show the rest of the team here, it'd be really interesting to have you come and do that, because that may make us go, oh yeah, we totally understand what you're talking about now, right?
I'll demo it next time. I have it kind of going. I tried a little bit of everything. I published every registry I could find.
Sounds good.
For what it's worth, but I think I understand the use case you're presenting. It definitely, I've seen apps like I think Webpack's a good example where they have tests, they refer to them as test cases. They literally like stub out like a file A, file B, run Webpack on this directory and literally verify the cumulative output.
Yep.
And I think you see a lot of that with like maybe static generator sites, like, where you want to literally, you might unit test your internals, but you might still like literally want to mock out a directory of like some markdown and run your command line tool and make sure it spits out, HTML on the other side. So
yeah,
I think maybe I'm also open for an issue like on that particular strategy that could be done after one of these, and I could definitely, I think I know what you're going at, and maybe not to lose it, we could, keep the discussion going in a thread and then maybe bring it back to the team.
Yeah.
And I mean, for the record, like it's already hard just to test Babel output, let alone Babel input on a project. I've only done it on 2 projects out of like 12 that I've touched that use Babel, and it's not easy. So even trying to make that easy would probably help the ecosystem a lot.
I think that there's different ways to approach testing, like different tools have different ways to be used, and if it helps someone feel like there's actually a square hole to put something in, then it might just be like, oh, I didn't think about doing it that way. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. The testing that you describe in terms of like running the command line tools, that's what we're doing in part in the support testing, and that it does run the CLI on like, here's the input that we expect, here's the output that we expect. And so there's probably even some overlap from that perspective.
I'll put in the agenda for another time to show you, but you're probably right. I think yeah, let's get them to do different. Let's get them to do LTS and unit tests and the basics. I sometimes run away with myself expecting too much. I think we've got to get majority of people to do the basics.
Mm-hmm. And we haven't even talked about code coverage yet, which you could get after those things.
I've avoided that in the document. Yeah. The camps. No, we don't want to start that war again.
Right.
Okay, so let's we're down to 5 minutes, so let's move on to the last issue, which is testing doc final review number 370.
So I have most of this mostly reviewed. Tierney had a few issue, and I addressed that today. We have 4 approvers.
It looks like it was merged on June 11th.
Okay, have I linked it to the wrong one? Hang on. That looks like.
You want 377.
Yeah, that should be 377.
Oh, okay.
Let me fix that. All right, you're doing it. 377.
So yeah, I can just update this to say 377. There we go. Okay, that one, right.
But the only thing I had was just removing the draft parentheses from the table of contents. I think it's good. I think what you have is enough to remove the draft label. So.
Support request 377. So we still have the word draft in there somewhere? I must have missed that.
I think it's in the outside file that refers to it, right, Owen?
Yeah, in the docs directory, there's a README, and that's got a table of contents.
Oh, okay. I get that.
But I think if you just add that, I don't think it needs to. If you've got the 4 approvals, you're probably still good.
Okay. If we're good with that, because I didn't know quite what to do with Tierney's, because it was just kind of sitting there. I addressed an issue here today, and I want to get onto the CI/CD open parenthesis pipeline close parenthesis. Try to ignore the word pipeline, so we can refer backwards and forwards between the two. Because I think for basic stuff for LTS in unit testing, there are a number of different options. So we've got GitHub Actions, we've got Travis. We've got Circle. What other ones do we use? AppVeyor.
BuildKite.
Yeah, we'll have to try and do the basics.
Those are the biggest ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, GitHub, Travis, AppVeyor, and Circle are probably the top 4. And Azure is the whole other one.
Okay, so you think you've addressed all of Tierney's?
I think so. Today he didn't like. He's right. He said the word guarantee was a bit strong, so I changed it because I thought, yeah, that probably is a bit strong. And so I used the word to indicate that we believe it will work on the latest versions of Node rather than guarantee.
Okay, yeah. Okay, any other discussion on that before we move on?
Good stuff. Thanks for working through it.
Because I want to get on the CI/CD actually interests me quite a lot. I think quite a lot can be done in this area, quite a lot of encouragement. It is free and it does work, and the basics are quite simple. Like, we just encourage people to do them.
Yeah, I think if we just make it really easy for people to get PR, green check marks, and a little branch maintenance, that'll be a nice sweet spot for jumping off, I think. So we're almost there.
Okay, I think that's pretty much then we're at the end of our list. I did want to thank, I'm just saying, Rodian for all his help on the support package. He's done a number of investigations, comments, reviews for me. So thanks a lot for doing that, because it's been very helpful in moving that forward.
Thanks. Thanks.
And I guess we'll talk to everybody next time.
Bye, everyone. Keep
Okay,
safe.
thanks.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye bye.